Yes. That was a big pop.
Welcome back to the channel. Today we're talking about the Santa Cruz Nomad versus the Forbidden Dreadnought MX. These are probably the two bikes I spent the most of my time on this fall, and I have a few thoughts. We're gonna follow the standard formula, starting with descending, but following the loam library breakdown, and then touch on climbing and how they look for quality and value. Since I had the Dreadnought for an extended review and still own the Nomad, we'll get a little bit deeper into how they held up. Before we get into it, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment with what bikes you'd like compared next. Now let's get into the fun stuff. Descending wise, these bikes take a fairly different approach, but both make for extremely confident and capable descenders. The Dreadnought definitely feels like the race machine and the bike trying to eke out the most advantage. This is primarily true in the chunk and at high speeds. The Dreadnought is nearly 20 millimeters longer in the wheelbase and gets even longer deeper into the travel. These bikes have nearly the same reach, and I immediately felt at home on both bikes. The biggest difference here was the feeling through the pedals. The Dreadnought more floated over rough terrain and still allowed you to preload and get in the air. The only downside I felt to this was the bottom bracket height. According to their sites, there's only a 2 millimeter difference between the bottom brackets, but felt much more significant on the trail. I found it important to run less sag on the Forbidden, and even still slid the lower guide on rocks and roots, more often than I'd like. Getting into the steeps, I'd be hard pressed to rank one bike over the other. The Forbidden may have a touch more traction when it comes to creeping down those things that your brakes actually work on. But when it came to commitment, I felt that both bikes had my back. I do think I prefer the new Fox 38 for those moves, but that's independent of the bike. Jumping is one of the areas that did set these bikes apart. That feeling I've previously mentioned at the pedals can be referred to as mid-stroke. This is the idea that when you push the suspension, it pushes back. If it pushes back too much, people complain of pedal feedback or pedal kickback. If you push and it just mushes, people complain the bike's not playful. And yes, suspension setup can play a role, but no, you can't get around a suspension design with fancy suspension bits. And increasing rebound is definitely not the correct route. Jumping the Nomad is the clear winner. When speeds are high, your body weight presses down on the suspension on the way up a lip. That's one of the reasons riders hitting big jumps tend to run their pressures high, with volume reducers to increase ramp and compression settings nearly closed. It's not the spring back or the rebound that's the issue here. It can be an issue, but it's not controlling where you sit in the travel. The shorter wheelbase allows both fork and rear shock to offer more support in those tighter transitions, but overall it's the rear shock that can make or break things. With all that said, the Dreadnought doesn't fail in this aspect. It jumps fine, but it prefers a larger radius takeoff. Bike park jumps like A-Line and Dirt Merchant were no problem on the Dreadnought. But the Nomad will also shine there, as well as tighter and more technical jumps.
Perfect. Perfect. Nice.
Last in the corners. I've already talked about the different types of corners, but basically we're talking about big sweeping corners where you're basically holding a line in loose or off camber, and tight corners or pockets. I gave these bikes similar scores here for all-out performance, but there are clear distinctions. The Dreadnought performs more in those loose and high-speed corners. It tracks and holds a line better with less deflections and more control. The Nomad, however, loves being pumped and pushed into tight corners and pops out with more energy. It breaks loose consistently, and pulling back from a slide generally goes well. This is another area the Dreadnought likely benefits the racer over the casual rider. Overall, that's a win for the Dreadnought in the chunk, a tie on the steeps, a win for the Nomad on jumps, and a conditional tie for corners. Now let's get into how these things climb. They both make their way up the hill without issue. I prefer how the Nomad felt on long climbs, but when it came to efficiency, traction, and switchbacks, there was little daylight between the two. That's getting us to one caveat, mostly around efficiency. The Dreadnought's high pivot is going to require more maintenance. We all know we should clean and lube our chain, but don't forget those pulleys. Also, don't forget the chain, because the difference from a dry or squeaky chain with the Nomad versus the Dreadnought is night and day. It's not just louder and more annoying, but you feel it in the pedals. Living with the Dreadnought and forgetting to lube my chain was embarrassing because of the noise and a bit demoralizing as you ground up the climb knowing you were working that much harder. I talked about in the Enduro Showdown video, but after a few months on the Dreadnought and most of the summer on the Santa Cruz Nomad, it's evident that Forbidden has an eye on the racer, where the Nomad is a bit of a more all-around bike made to take on the gnarliest terrain. So how are these bikes to live with? Well, I gave my top score to the Forbidden for quality, but after some time dropped at a point. Like I mentioned in the climbing summary, it does require a bit more basic maintenance, but also the high pivot seems to pull harder on the SRAM transmission, and I had to reset the derailleur after more aggressive descents. This is an issue I've seen on other bikes, but it happened more with the Dreadnought. Beyond that, the bike was quiet and the paint still looked good. I've often seen matte paint jobs not hold up well, but the Forbidden paint seems to be good quality. Next, for value, it's basically in line with the rest of the industry, but I do wish they followed in Santa Cruz's footsteps and offered a lifetime warranty on the bearings. This would help the value. They still have the mid-tier build on their site for a great deal, so that value right now is a little bit higher.
Whoa!
On the Nomad side, I usually give Santa Cruz my top score for quality, but the Nomad arrived with some rattle, so I had to deduct a point there. However, it's held up extremely well, so I may have to give it back that point. Overall, living with the Nomad though is one of the easiest bikes to own, and the paint is also holding up. Touching on features, both bikes offer similar amounts of things, just slightly different. The in-frame storage on the Santa Cruz is better, as is the frame protection, but the cable clamps on the Forbidden are nice and keep things quiet.
Greased it.
Speaking of features, what about adjustments? Santa Cruz has the flip chip, which is fine, but offers very little change. Forbidden leans more into the racy side of things with the dropout adjustment. This could be a feel thing, but could also have a measurable advantage depending on the track. It also allows for dual 2.9 or MX wheels. While there are more bolts with the Forbidden system, I found it pretty easy to swap out. Final thoughts, and who are these bikes for? To me, it's an easy one, but I think most riders would be happy with either bike. If you're a racer looking for an edge, the Dreadnought wins. It will require more effort and upkeep, but at the end of the day, it's likely faster.
Woohoo! Oh, that was the best. I've done that in the worst conditions.
Interested in an all-around or park bike? You'll probably find the Nomad as a better fit. Gnarly jumps and high speeds, big jumps and big moves, these are the types of bikes you'll want. The Dreadnought does more to slow things down, and if your terrain is flatter, you'll probably have trouble really getting the most out of it. That said, the Nomad is also a big bike, so it gets back to buying the bike for your terrain and ambitions. If you want to ride the gnarly stuff and don't mind lugging around the extra weight, enduro bikes are the way to go. The boost of confidence is real, but knowing you can't blame the bike is also its own type of issue. Thanks for watching, and please subscribe. Let me know what bikes you'd like to see on the channel.
Hopefully I got that.
Check out Jensen USA and the other affiliate links on my channel's page. It goes a long way to keep this channel going. Now get out there, go fast, and take chances. See you next week.
Why did I overshoot it again?
So far.
Look at my water bottle, almost lost it.